Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're mapping out a highly complex and honestly kind of unbelievable political theory from a recent investigation. We're going to trace a web that connects the gritty, on-the-ground reality of modern New York street politics right through the pristine halls of the global establishment and all the way back into a 1930s Italian prison cell. Why should you care? Well, because this intricate narrative attempts to explain the absolute chaos of today's partisan battle lines through a massive lens of history, economics, and culture.
Okay, let's dive into this. Picture the intense, really visceral reactions to the recent New York congressional primary wins by candidates backed by Zoran Mamdani. At the victory parties, you literally have audiences chanting, "You were next," right at establishment figures. Meanwhile, on the completely opposite side of the aisle, a genuinely panicked Republican representative goes on record warning that Democrats have a Bolshevik revolution going on in their primaries. The source points out that these victories by the Democratic Socialists of America, or the DSA, are sending absolute shockwaves through the entire political system. But, to understand exactly why, we really have to look past the everyday headlines.
So here's our roadmap for how the source zooms out from local politics to a grand global scale. 1. The DSA election victories. 2. Gramsci and Cultural Revolution. 3. The CFR post-Trump strategy. 4. The British historical connection. And finally, number 5, reviving the American system.
All right, starting things off with Section 1, the DSA election victories.
Now, what's really interesting here is the stark contrast the source draws between the DSA's outward-facing messaging and what it claims is their actual internal platform. Publicly, right? The pitch is packed with highly popular economic policies. We're talking improving city transit, enacting rent freezes, taxing billionaires. It sounds totally practical. But the source claims that if you look at their internal educational programs, it reveals a platform fundamentally aimed at dismantling the current system altogether. We're talking about massive goals here, like completely scrapping the U.S. Constitution, defunding the Department of War, granting total amnesty for immigrants, and even replacing the President and the Supreme Court with congressional bodies.
To really underscore the severity of this underlying ideology, the source points to a highly specific and honestly striking anecdote. An investigation actually uncovered a since-deleted Instagram post. It was linked to an apartheid disinvestment group that was associated with a DSA candidate, and it stated, very plainly, "We are Westerners committed to the total eradication of Western civilization." The explainer neutrally presents this to argue that the movement's ultimate goal isn't just about, tweaking tax brackets. It's a foundational attack on Western civic structures themselves.
Moving right along to Section 2, Gramsci and Cultural Revolution.
So who is the mastermind behind this modern platform? Well, according to the theory, it's communist writer Antonio Gramsci. His absolute core idea is something called a hegemonic counterculture. This is the theory that a true revolution requires hollowing out and making people genuinely hate their own national culture before a political takeover can successfully happen. Think of it kind of like termites eating the foundation of a house. You have to attack the traditions, the history, and the social norms first, so the structure is already totally compromised. The actual political takeover, that's just the cleanup operation.
Now, to understand how Gramsci's subversive ideas survived to influence today's politics, we have to look at the number 33. That is the astonishing amount of dense, handwritten notebooks Gramsci managed to produce while he was locked away in a prison cell. The source claims these very notebooks, which amount to over 2,000 pages of smuggled material, are exactly what revived Marxist theory after the original Russian model failed to spread globally.
Let's just trace how incredibly unlikely this survival actually was. Back in 1926, Gramsci is arrested by Mussolini's fascist government and gets slapped with a massive 20-year sentence. By all accounts, he should have been completely forgotten in the dark. Yet for 11 years, he survives in that cell, writing in secret. He eventually dies in prison in 1937, but as the source argues, his ideas basically escaped those prison walls, eventually becoming the explicit theoretical foundation for today's insurgent movements.
Which brings us to Section 3, the CFR post-Trump strategy.
So the crucial point here is what the source identifies as the Gramsci paradox. On one hand, it makes perfect sense that the revolutionary left, like the DSA, uses Gramsci's writings to build a counterculture, right? But on the other hand, actually it's almost darkly comedic when you think about it. The globalist establishment, specifically the elite Council on Foreign Relations, is also actively using Gramsci as a reference point. The CFR is literally using a Marxist prisoner's frameworks to plan out what they call a post-Trump world. To back up this claim, the source highlights a recent lead essay from a CFR senior fellow. That essay literally opens with Gramsci's famous words written from that prison cell in 1930. The old order is dying and the new cannot yet be born. A great variety of morbid symptoms appear. According to the source, the CFR essay deliberately uses this dead communist framework and specifically labels Donald Trump and populist movements as those very morbid symptoms that need to be managed and overcome.
All right, zooming out to Section 4, the British historical connection.
So how in the world did this all happen? Well, the source traces these modern events all the way back to the British Empire. It starts with a Marxist economist named Piero Scaraffa, who was working at Cambridge University, directly under the sponsorship of the incredibly powerful British establishment economist Lord John Maynard Keynes. Scaraffa uses his elite position to secretly supply the imprisoned Gramsci with books, keeping him connected to the outside world. Ultimately, it is Scaraffa who arranges the publication of Gramsci's revolutionary notebooks in London. The source neutrally presents this whole chain of events to make a pretty startling claim that elite British financial figures intentionally preserved and disseminated Gramsci's radical work.
And the source uses this data to make a much broader historical argument, that British imperial networks have historically funded and protected radical communist movements to basically use them as weapons against their geopolitical rivals. Think about Karl Marx for a second. He operated out of London, he was heavily funded by industrialists, and according to the source, his primary target was Russia. Then consider Antonio Gramsci. His work was preserved by the London Keynes network, and the source argues his cultural Marxism was aimed directly at America, starting around the 1960s. The claim is that the establishment uses these radicals to weaken sovereign nations from the inside out.
And that leads us to our final section, Part 5, Reviving the American System. So if this complex, massive web is aligned against national sovereignty, what's the antidote? The source outlines what they call the American system. This is an economic and cultural framework heavily associated with Donald Trump's platform today, but it's modeled directly on historical policies from figures like Alexander Hamilton and Abraham Lincoln. This antidote involves a huge push for re-industrialization and sovereign manufacturing. It requires enacting protective tariffs to build up domestic strength and a foreign policy based entirely on the dignity of individual nation-states. And crucially, it demands reviving a profound culture of optimism, a spirit designed to conquer new frontiers, rather than just endlessly critiquing our own history.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the source believes globalist institutions and radical insurgent movements are, paradoxically, completely aligned with each other. The American system of economics is considered a deadly threat to the City of London's survival, and by extension, the survival of the entire globalist financial network. The working theory is that a strong, self-sufficient, culturally confident America fundamentally dismantles the control mechanisms of both cultural Marxism and elite foreign policy institutions. Therefore, they both fight it using the exact same theoretical frameworks.
Which leaves us with a final, truly fascinating question to consider. Are the partisan battle lines we see on the news every single night really about modern politics? Or are we just watching a century-old proxy war playing out in real time? Whether you completely buy into the source's intricate connections or you remain highly skeptical, this theory definitely challenges us to look a lot closer at the underlying philosophies driving the media we consume. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the structures behind the headlines, and we'll see you in the next explainer.